This is Steve Young for the Co-Roundtable. Recently I was speaking about the analogy between illness and health and why we care about something like moral capitalism or company culture or individual agency, self-confidence. There's something related, I think, to this concept of sort of something that's ill or lack of well-being. This may strike you as a bit strange, but debt, asset bubbles, the collapse of asset bubbles, too much debt, too much money. Is this actually healthy for a company, a country, a person, a family? Let's make an analogy. This might be silly, but let's try it for a bit. Between money, I'm talking money like paper money, or digital accounts that are in some bank or financial institution that you can trade with somebody else to get something real, like you can buy a house, or you can get a car, something like that. So that this flow of power, what if it's a virus? What if a certain amount of it is okay, you can tolerate it, or maybe, I don't know, it's some kind of let's say the probiotic bacteria in your stomach and your intestines, which you need to some extent. But if something happens, it gets triggered and it gets out of control, then you're not comfortable and you can be pretty miserable. We have two examples now, yet again, of too much debt. One is in China, the other is in the United States. And my reaction in reading the newspaper to both of these excessive debt situations is, why don't people learn? Where are the really smart people? If you go back to the history primarily of capitalism, let's say, this excess debt asset bubble started with the tulip mania, and I think 1624, 1626, right at the beginning of capitalism. Some of you may know that story, others may not. Basically, the Dutch grew a lot of tulip bulbs, which made flowers. I think it's one flower per bulb. And at the same time, the growing aristocracy in France, wealthy families, were building big chateaus with big gardens. And they wanted to fill their gardens with really lovely tulips. So the price of bulbs in Holland was rising, which led to a speculative market where growers would sell contracts early in the year to deliver their bulbs, which I gather are dug up in the fall, to somebody. So you would, in order to make money, you would buy, let's say, a lot of bulbs for, or one gross of bulbs for, let's say, 10 guilders. And then, because you're speculating that when fall comes around, you can resell. Either you can resell your contract, or you can actually sell the bulbs for, let's say, 100 guilders. And lots of people in Holland, they would mortgage the cows, the pigs, the houses in order to get cash, money, in order to buy access to bulbs. And then the market crashed, and a whole lot of people went bankrupt. There was the South Sea bubble in London, in England. A lot of people lost money. There was also the Mississippi bubble in France, started by an English guy, John Law, who went over there, which I read some historians thinking when it crashed, when the market crashed, it basically wiped out the nascent growing middle class in France. So by the time you got to the 1780s, the time of the French Revolution, there really was no middle class. There were a lot of poor people. There were some aristocrats, very wealthy, not much in the middle, to sort of moderate the politics. Well, in the United States, we've had any number of bubbles in the 19th century. Biggest one was the 1920s, which triggered the Great Depression. We had one in 2007 on subprime mortgages, now we've had two, if you will, asset bubbles. One is in real estate since about 2015, where low interest. The government, and by the way, another factor in this situation, creating assets, is who creates money. If you create a lot of money, if money is cheap, people are going to borrow. Why not? Take a chance, right? You might win. Well, the question, of course, is always question mark. You might win. People seem to think that they're going to win, and they kind of forget that they might lose. So a lot of Americans, particularly in big cities, companies, investment companies, they borrowed trillions, I think maybe $3 trillion, I think, total, in order to build big, basically condos, apartment houses, office buildings in the big cities. There's an article in today's Wall Street Journal which talks about the asset bubble bursting. Real estate doom loop threatens America's banks. Too much credit going to something, and the good times came to an end. Now, if you're practical, and you go back to the notion of what is healthy, good times, like a binge, they always come to an end, and then you don't feel so healthy. The second thing in the United States, where we have now seen too much debt, I would argue, is with our young people who pay for a college education, mostly by borrowing money. I think it's almost $1.5 trillion that families and students have borrowed in order to finance to get their education, a 4-year degree, and then graduate school education. Now, the interesting question is, where'd that money go? It turns out that the quality of education is actually either the same or down, even for all this money being spent. The number of professors is about the same, but the number of administrators and buildings has gone way up. So as the debt increases, salaries increase, and buildings increase. At some point, students starting like right now are realizing there's too much debt. I can't afford this. In fact, even in my own family, I have a grandson who's rethinking this. He said, I'm going to spend, or I'm going to get my parents and me to spend $80,000 a year for 4 years to get a piece of paper that, and I don't really know what I want to do as an adult. I don't have a sense of my vocation, my career yet. So we've created a big bubble. Again, it's been easy money for a long time, but the institutions of higher education, they took the money in. It wasn't their debt, it was theirs. It's even worse for me, maybe, because other people were undertaking the debt, the responsibility to pay it back, and you were spending it. Now in China, what is happening in China? There's a serious economic slowdown, and there's a bubble bursting in the real property sector. Major Chinese corporations, which have built hundreds, thousands of multi-story buildings, many of which are empty, the ghost city phenomenon, because they couldn't sell them. Now they can't repay their loans. In China, the case was probably even more irresponsible because the money was all created by government. It went through government banks or local governments, provinces and cities. They would just set up a bank, and the bank would then loan cash, which they could get from the Central Bank of China. People took the cash and would go out and build a building. And technically, they'd have to repay the loans. Now, the companies can't repay, local governments can't repay, people are not buying, the economy is losing energy. It's an unhealthy economy. Too much debt. My conclusion from all this, tentatively, is a relationship between irresponsibility and reality, which is that reality punishes irresponsibility and rewards responsibility.